He told me he got put between me legs. Said he wanted me to try fucking him one day. Warned me I'd have to take it slowly since he'd never done it before. I wonder if I believed him. Even then. God knows I wanted to. It's not that he didn't love me, but his love came in effusions of sentiment and self-pity. Oh, it had emotional energy, all right. No shortage of sparks. But it gave no light and left no lasting heat. I'm a guilty man. A sinner who has done unspeakable things. Think about how we managed, despite the awful silence required, to enumerate our failings, to speak indeed of nothing else. I'd known him 6 or 7 months before he offered himself to me that way the first time. Even though I'd never taken him up on it and don't know for sure if I ever would have, the fact that he brought it up made me feel real special. He was 5 months shy of turning 18, I a mere 2 from 38. That was over 20 years ago. In the February following that mild June night when I first came across him, brought him into my house, ravished him, and paid him. Yes, I paid him. I didn't think twice about it then. He was a working boy, and it wasn't like I'd gone after him or anything. No, the contrary would have been true. Oh, he was the most corrupt of lads long before he crossed my doorstep. If I talk about the sex, which was often exquisite, it's only because I have to. Because the story makes no sense if it's left unfactored. The score was so overt, I found it irresistible. An unwashed teenager from the inner city. Oh, of all my sins, and there have been many since, many most of you would consider far more egregious, it was that single moment of selfish, careless design that has lived to haunt me longest. If there wasn't a shame in my callous acquisition, would the desire have grown as it did? True, I'd been out drinking. True, I was randy as a goat when the days grow long. And when I passed him, cute little fuck that he was, it seemed like he'd been sent there for me, to see me home and wrap me up. But only after I'd done a bit of unwrapping all my own. It seemed an honest economy. A deft exchange. God knows I didn't need him for the sex. On the night that thought relieved me. I was an amateur, at least on the level of crisp, cold notes. That thought relieved me too. Figured that there wasn't all that great a difference between this and the nights I'd been, champagne for a 20-minute suck on the side. Sex, I told myself, is always an exchange. Pleasure for treats, for weekends away. I've done it nearly 100 times. I didn't see this boy as being all that strange to me. Oh, remembering that first night, that morning, when the pastel-scented light came passing over us, how did I not know we would come to this? I found his trestle of jet black hair beneath my chin, his left arm tossed carelessly across me, gripping me regularly in irregular little spasms of unconscious distress. When I saw that fellow, I knew he was a prodigy all his own. And in my unthinking wickedness, I looked at him as if he belonged to me, as if taking him there and then was a birthright, an indulgence earned by what? By vanity, lust, and greed. That's what. I don't remember when or how his affection became a habit for me. I suppose he visited me again shortly after, 2 weeks or so. From there, his visits got increasingly frequent and prolonged. Where one orgasm had done, now there were 2. Sometimes 3. I never had to call him. Promised myself I never would. Yet, with each additional session, my craving for him grew. We didn't talk much that first evening. I was too drunk to bother, he too cautious to care. When we first walked into the sitting room, while I was still rustling about, sweeping up some empty plates and stacking my ever-growing piles of newsprint in a corner, he stood dead center and eyed the paintings, photos, and hangings that lined the walls. Is that what you call art? He asked. I ushered him into a chair. He was finding me exotic, too. Although he refused the alcohol I offered, he didn't say no to the joints I speedily rolled. As I did, I could tell he was watching closely, and that he approved. Aerodynamic spliffs were an artistry he was confident about judging. When I passed it to him, our skins touching, making contact for the very first time, he said, "Nice one," in that short and hamming snarl of his. Of course, he only meant to say thanks, but from the cool, dispassionate way he pulled it, the smoke tapering up from his nostrils and mouth, I found a compliment hidden beneath it. Even believed he looked at me less warily. Looking back, it was probably nothing more than the joint itself that relaxed him, that in my own willful absorption, I failed to notice the firecracker nerves behind his terse displays. A magnificent hard-arm had arrived the moment we walked into the lights of the house. He was even prettier than I'd imagined in the misty half-light of the canal. I didn't know if I'd ever seen such thick black hair, such unblemished skin. One thing was clear. I didn't just want to be a customer. No, I wanted him to like me, to at least like pretending to like me. Well, that's probably the kind of play acting everybody wants with their purchase. Not that it ever translates into your forgetting that you're paying and that the prize of an unhesitating surrender will always be yours. Gotta admit it's a winning combination. On top of the initial allure, you may yet win both the body and the heart of your accomplice in the drama you are buying at an hourly rate. I knew there was no having him at that rate. No having him all at once. He'd be revealed with time and time alone. I decided to broach a subject I knew he wouldn't evade so easily. How much for the night? The question seemed to stun him slightly. Maybe he didn't even realize at that stage that I knew it'd all be a cash transaction. 100, he stammered, his head winding down with every choked utterance until it snapped at the consonant and crashed free. Only then did it occur to me that his silence may not have been butch assurance, but a nervous disguise, a way of keeping his cool in a situation he hadn't fully judged. I was drunk enough to be wise enough to know it was late enough that he'd settle for half. It was all I had anyway, but I was confident. Confident his own reply had been a bit of a bluff to begin with. Well, my imagination quickened even as I bargained him down. Well, what do you want to do, he asked, eyebrows knitting a black bridge across his forehead. Oh, he was keyed into Seth's rules enough to have set an acceptable two-tiered system in his head. If that was all there was going to be, he could accept 50 for the night without seeming to undersell or cut himself short. Once that was out of the way, things relaxed considerably. He finally told me his real name. I wasn't sure if the revelation had been intentional or if he'd just forgot that he'd originally lied. His friends called him Buzzy. I've been getting high since they'd done me first communion, he boasted, laughing for the first time, his upper lip pulled back to reveal a set of prominent, if slightly discolored teeth. Buzzy chuckled and squinted. For the first time I could see those dimples. Icing on the cake. Can I do a number, he asked. I nodded reassuringly at him and threw a freebie on the CD. His head started bobbing to the music. Deadly, he exclaimed. Can you loud it up? Without even answering, I turned back to it and boosted it up to 4, more than enough to fill the quiet room. Sitting down next to him, I watched his hands as he deftly began skinning up a spliff in record-breaking time. His hands were dirty, his encrusted nails crudely bitten at violent angles. They were good hands, though. Broad, defined, strong, supple. As he lit the joint to his lips, a burning torch engulfed the tip. I took his left hand in my own and brought it towards my face. Though he viewed me curiously, he fanned his palm and stroked my cheek. Looking up over his hand, our eyes met. He registered my presence at a distance, and when I began to slowly take his fingers, first singly, then severally, into my mouth, his eyes shut themselves up in a well-rehearsed pose of arousal. From that moment on, there were few, if any, words passed between us. As I drew my teeth together over the base of his palm, he kicked his runners to the floor. Taking his hand away, he stood before me and passed me the joint. His own lungs were full, and he moved quickly to strip before exhaling. Strip right down to a pair of clinging red knickers. How I admired him then! Far from muscle-bound or even exercise, the smooth, lean, guaranteed firmness of him was nearly beyond endurance. Its appeal was greater than if he'd worked for it. He seemed, instead, to be some miracle of nature, some wild and magical creature. I reached with my free hand around his waist and drew him toward me, my first release of smoke curving invidiously into and out of his perfectly formed oval of the navel. To taste is to possess. There are many things I learned about him later, so many things I learned, that these first impressions are probably distorted. But this I remember vividly. At that moment, the instant when my tongue met his firm, buoyant flesh at a locus of muscle 2 or 3 inches above his navel, it was the tang of fresh wood shavings, the sweetness of freshly cut hay that startled me, that drove me on in an unleashed passion for the essence of him himself. His pits had the faintest whiff of chicken broth scent, a recognizably natural smell. But most astonishing was his ass itself, plump and perfect, an Athenian virtue, whose odor was equal parts of apple, overripe vanilla, and damp oak. His foreskin smelt of sour piss, all sticky and quick dissolving on the tongue. I loved the way my attention seemed to grow on him. I mean, the first few times he was nice enough, but his rationale always remained a little gift he was invariably rewarded. Gradually, he became more eager, arriving earlier and earlier, marching into my room and tossing his taut little frame across the bed. His cock seemed to get bigger with every viewing, and he started unveiling it even before our first joint would be done. It wasn't like he was in a rush or anything. I mean, sometimes after coming, we'd shower and lie lazily back, smoking joints, polishing off the Pepsi, drifting in and out of a semi-conscious stupor, wrapped sometimes in each other's arms. We hardly ever talked. It never seemed like there was anything that important to say. Some days we'd start with a back rub, the buzzer, as I'd come to call him, liked that best of all. My hands tracing his muscles, intense and warm. It always took about 15 minutes to work to the base of his spine. He'd raise that classic polished butt of his. Oh man, we'd both be as hard as hammers. Every shot I shot with him was a spectacle. Fireworks, spewing explosives in streamy globs, aromatic and white. Oh man, this was more than pleasure. It was also rampant pride. My dick stayed hard, swinging thick for ages. I'd rub it up against him when we showered, just to let him know. Of course, those first 2 or 3 months might have played differently. Perhaps as I had with his stutter, I just bred everything the way I wanted. Selfishness is the greatest aphrodisiac, after all. And what more did I need to admit at that stage? Then I think in August, his 10th visit or so, things began to change. I remember it was the first time our tongues clamped together, our mouths clamped together, and our tongues probed deep. The hunger was real. My cock stayed stiff and came again another 15 minutes later. Buzzy himself sprang up to match me. Even he seemed to know this was a red-letter day. That was something, he said. His voice sank and croaky and in need of clearing. We smoked that second joint with giddy elevation. Usually after sex, he'd be passive or anxious, friendly, but, a little remote. That afternoon, we'd laughed so hard. He passed his little judgments on all my friends he'd met. You should have warned me, he said, remembering the strange embrace of an academic lady friend. She hung with Protestant curiosity on the saddest details of the buzz's life. He'd only managed to list 1 or 2, but that proved enough to win her drunken devotion. And she'd squeezed him for so long, I grew jealous. When I reminded him that I told him to take cover in the bedroom as her persistently familiar ring chimed out, he retorted, yeah, I thought he was ashamed of me or something. And I remember that he was right. That I'd worried she'd get creepy curious when she saw a boy like the Buzzer sitting in my sitting room. Even through our laughter, I had to admit it. Had to tell him just how stupid I'd been. Did it in a funny way, laughing all the time. When he added, she'd have found me anyway, with a weary, laconic sigh, we laughed even louder, and another joint got rolled. The longer silence that followed wasn't just our having laughed ourselves out, though I thought it might have been. From there, the day shifted upwards to a virgin plateau, a place of ever more intimate exchange. That afternoon, 16th of August, was bound to change our lives. Later, after he'd left, and after I'd eaten and watched some junk TV, I went back to the bedroom and parachuted the duvet out in a token gesture of domesticity. The clunking sound turned out to be his lighter, bouncing out and crashing to the floor. A cheap white Bic. Nothing special. I went to lift it, and when I touched it, I could smell his ass, taste his cum, feel the soft black bristles on my neck. In a penetrating flash, I knew I'd begun to love him. Then, suddenly, he stopped calling around.